Welcome on this fourth Sunday in Advent. Our gospel lesson for today is from St. John, the 9th chapter. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be made manifest in him." As he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay and anointed the man's eyes with the clay, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors of those who had seen him before as a beggar said, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Someone said, "It is he." And others said, "No, but he's like him." He said, "I am the man." They said to him, "Then how are your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and received my sight." Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And the Pharisees again asked him how that he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see." They called his parents and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was blind at birth?" They said, "Ask him." So again they called him, and he told them, "He was blind, and now he sees." And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and so Jesus found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. Here ends our gospel reading for today. Thanks be to God. I came across a list, great truths about life that little children have learned. No matter how hard you try, you cannot baptize a cat. That's the first one on the list. The second one is, when your mom is mad at your dad, don't let her brush your hair. The third one was, never ask your 3-year-old brother to hold a tomato or an egg. The fourth is, you cannot trust dogs to watch your food for you. And the fifth one, don't sneeze when somebody is cutting your hair. Now, it's virtually certain that the children learned these great truths as a result of experience from their own personal lives. Can't you just see some children trying to actually baptize a cat and learning full well from that experience? This is just really not a good thing to do. The point is clear, that a dramatic, personal, eye-opening experience can give us new insight, new perception, and a new vision. On a much deeper level, that's precisely what we discover in John chapter 9. A blind man from birth has a dramatic, eye-opening experience with Jesus. And talk about a new vision, talk about new insight. He's completely and totally healed. He's made whole, and he comes back from the pool of Siloam with 20/20 vision, able to see perfectly for the first time in his life. His transformation is so complete, so dramatic, that he even physically looks a little different. And the townspeople see him and say, "Hey, isn't that the blind beggar? How can he see now? Is that really him?" "No, it's just someone who looks like him that can possibly be him." And the former blind man says, "It's me, all right. I'm the man." If we remember the story, one day as Jesus and his disciples were walking along, they see a pitiful sight, a man who has been blind from birth. The disciples watch him as he's groveling and begging there in the gutter, as he crouches there and feels in the dirt for scraps of food and garbage, and pleading without much success for help. Intrigued by this man's horrible plight, the disciples asked Jesus, "Who sinned? Was it this man or his parents? Why was he born blind? Was it his fault? Or did someone in his family do something that caused this to happen?" There's an interesting theological point here. The religious leaders of Jesus' time had taken the mistake. It was a mistaken notion, if you will. The people had problems because they had sinned, and this was God's judgment upon them for their wrongdoings. So these blind people, or lame people, or leprous people, or poor people were looked down upon by society of sinners as bad people, and they were shunned. But Jesus didn't see them as sinners or as bad people. He saw them as children of God, as people of integrity and worth, as members of God's family, as his brothers and sisters, and he loved them, and he embraced them, he enjoyed them, and he healed them. So here in chapter 9 of John, Jesus goes over to the blind man to help him. Notice that when the disciples see the blind man, they see something to discuss. But when Jesus sees him, he sees something to do. The disciples want to debate why this has happened and talk about it. They want to give their energy to words. But Jesus puts his energy into action. The point is this: it's not enough to talk about things. What pleases God is when we do something about the situation. So notice this. He spits on the ground, he makes clay, and he anoints the man's eyes with the clay. Now, if that seems repulsive to you, don't let it be. Saliva has long been a folk remedy. Ancient people believed strongly in its curative powers, and in a sense, we still do. At least our children do. A child burns his finger and the first instinct is to put it in your mouth. Or a child scrapes their arm or gets a boo-boo and runs over to mom or dad to kiss it and make it well. Jesus anoints the man's eyes with the clay. Now, the single most important word in this whole passage is this word, anoints. The word the original Greek uses here for anoints is the same word it uses for the word Christ, which of course means the anointed one. So if we recall the rest of the story, after anointing the man's eyes with the clay, Jesus sends him to wash in the pool of Siloam. And the man goes and washes away the clay and comes back seeing. Now the neighbors are amazed and they can't believe it. And they ask him how this happened, and he says, "A man called Jesus healed me and he gave me my sight. And there's great joy in the city, and they all live happily ever after," right? No, not quite. The Pharisees, the watchdogs of religion, get wind of this. They hear about this, and they come out fuming. They are upset about the whole thing because they're suspicious of everything Jesus does. But on top of that, it happened on the Sabbath day. It was a blatant violation of their rigid rules because he made clay and he healed on the Sabbath day, and that was strictly forbidden. So they come out to investigate. They interrogate the healed man's parents, they scare them out of their wits, and then they go back and interrogate the man for a second time, and he gives them the classic and powerful statement that resounded across the centuries. He says, "There's one thing I know. Once I was blind, but now I see." Look at what he's saying to their hard-line questioning. I don't know about all of the other things you're asking me. I don't know about the rules or the regulations or the restrictions. There's only one thing that I do know, that once I was blind, but now I see. The Pharisees are defeated by this argument, and they know it. So they do what people often do when they feel insecure and have no moral power, and they turn to force. They kick him out, they cast him out of the synagogue, and they excommunicate him. They get rid of him. Now that sets the stage for one of the most beautiful moments in all of Scripture. Jesus hears about it. Jesus goes and finds the man and comes to him, and he comes to his help. That's the good news, isn't it? When we are in trouble, Jesus comes to help. And when they come face to face, Jesus says to the man, "Do you believe in me, the Son of God?" And the healed man says, "Yes, Lord, I believe." It's so packed with the stuff of life happening in the world around us today. There is so much here: blindness and sight, sickness and healing, prejudice and love, fear and faith, rejection and acceptance, defeat and victory. But there's one question that explodes out of this gospel story. The one big question for us today is, are you blind, or can you see? Now, please don't misunderstand me. I love little babies. They're wonderful. They represent God's most amazing miracle, the miracle of birth. But the truth is that they are born blinded to selfishness. They see every person as someone who exists solely for their benefit and their comfort. That's the way babies are. They come into the world screaming, "Do something for me," like feed me, love me, hold me, burp me, change me, rock me. And throughout infancy and childhood, into the teen years, and sometimes, sadly, even into adulthood for some, it's me, me, me. Take care of me, do for me, cater to me, please me, give to me, pamper me. Jesus reminds us, time and time again in the Gospels, he makes it very clear that one of the things that blinds us the most is selfishness. And the only cure is to have our vision changed by Christ. To move from the selfish vision to service vision. To move from do something for me to let me do and be for God. Let me do for others in God's name. Let me ask you something. Can you see beyond your own selfish desires? Can you see yourself not as one to be selfishly pampered, but as one committed to being God's servant in this world? There's a wonderful story told by Tim Brewster about a mom who took her children to a crowded restaurant one day, and her 6-year-old son asked if he could say the grace. And he prayed, "God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. And God, I would thank you even more if Mom would get us ice cream for dessert. And liberty and justice for all. Amen." Along with the laughter from the other customers nearby who overheard it, there was one woman at the very next table who growled rather loudly, "That's what's wrong with this country. Kids today don't even know how to pray. The very idea, asking God for ice cream. Why, I never." And hearing this little 6-year-old boy burst into tears, he asked his mother, "Do I do it wrong? I'm sorry. Is God mad at me?" And the little boy's mother pulled him into her lap. She hugged him tightly and assured him he had done a terrific job in his prayer, and God was certainly not mad at him. Just then an elderly gentleman walked over to the table. He winked at the little boy and he said, "I know God very well. We visit every day. And I happen to know that God loved your prayer. It may have been one of the best he's heard all day." "Really?" the little boy asked. "Cross my heart," the man said. And then he leaned over and whispered into the little boy's ear. Pointing at the woman at the table next who had made the remark and started the whole thing, he said, "Too bad she never asked for ice cream from God. A little ice cream is good for the soul sometimes." Well, naturally, the mom ordered ice cream for her kids at the end of the meal. And the 6-year-old little boy stared at his for a moment. And then he did something that no one in the restaurant that day will ever forget. He picked up his sundae and without a word, walked over, placed it in front of the woman at the next table. And with a big smile, he said to her, "Here, this is for you. Ice cream is good for the soul sometimes, and my soul is good already." The people in the restaurant applauded, and somewhere in heaven, I'm sure Jesus is smiling. Because that little boy had already learned how to look at others with the eyes of sacrificial love. Sight, true sight, is always a matter of the heart, not the eyes. When our eyes are Christ-centered, we see with our hearts, and we realize what Jesus taught long ago, that we are all in this together, that we are all people for whom Christ came and died. When our eyes are anointed with the Spirit of Christ, then we see people differently. We see them as part of God's family. We accept them, we embrace them, help them, and treat them with love and respect. When our eyes are truly open, it changes the way we see ourselves. It changes the way we see other people, and it changes our relationship to God, bringing us much closer to Him. Amen.